arcade racing games from the early 90s, Slipstream reproduces the speed and thrills of classics such as Outrun or Super Hang-On. Drift your way through 20 tracks set in a variety of locations such as beaches, deserts, cities and even cemeteries. With authentically rendered graphics, a synthwave heavy soundtrack and streamlined gameplay, this is a blast of pure retro gaming nostalgia. It's not without its issues though, and it doesn't have the staying power or replayability of other racing games. Slipstream is all about simplicity. You've got 3 difficulty levels, 4 buttons, 5 cars and 6 game modes to choose from. Arcade mode sees you race 5 stages within a time limit and against a different rival in each stage. The Grand Prix Cups are made up of 5 races with 90 other racers and no traffic. The Cannonball is one long race against a set number of rivals and traffic. The quick race and time trial options round out the remaining game modes, and there's also a 4-player split screen option for when we're allowed to meet each other again. When starting out, it's tempting just to launch into games like this, but take my advice and do the tutorial. Without any knowledge of how the drift mechanic works, you will fail miserably at Slipstream. There's not a single turn that can be completed without drifting in any of the tracks, and the fact that it allows you to take turns without losing any speed is crucial to winning races. Funnily enough, despite it being literally the name of the game, slipstreaming isn't much use to you. Often you'll be actually looking to avoid it, as it has a tendency to kick in the most inopportune moments. Nothing will have you cursing like a drunk sailor more than ruining a perfectly good race because the slipstream kicked in midway through a chicane and sent you flying into a tree on the last lap. The first thing that will strike you about Slipstream is the sheer speed it runs at. The graphics do a perfect job of conveying the sense of speed that was the hallmark of classic racing games. And make no mistake, this is a game that considers taking a corner at anything less than 200 miles an hour slow. Everything in Slipstream is geared towards making the racing as fun as possible. Slicing through traffic at breakneck speed while a ticking clock and a rival racer, one of whom looks like Bob Ross for some reason, taunt you is tremendous fun. The different modes all have their own parameters, which helps keeps the action fresh, for a short while at least. While the biggest selling point of Slipstream is its faithful reproduction of classic racing games, I feel that this is also its biggest weakness. It's too faithful. In attempting to replicate what made its source material so good, Slipstream also wound up copying a lot of its flaws too. The main issue is that it gets old, fast, and there's little variety. The 5 cars available to choose from all look different, but they handle identically. 1 or 2 may accelerate faster or have a higher top speed, but you'll never feel like you're driving a different car. 20 tracks isn't a lot, and the game focuses more on course memorization than reflexes rather than any skill to progress. This means that when you've got all the track layouts down, the game is essentially finished. There's no other reason to go back to other than to beat a track time. The AI is absolute trash. The civilian traffic will actively ram you and seek to get in your way as often as possible. The same goes for the other racers, but the biggest issue with them is the fact that they all seem to be operating on a different set of physical laws than you. Ramming them will result in nothing but a speed boost for them, whereas them ramming you will leave your car spinning like a top in the middle of the road. There's no dirty tactics possible in Slipstream. You can't force them off the track into other cars or obstacles or slow them down at any point, turning what should be your race rivals into little more than moving crash barriers. Graphics in Slipstream look the exact same as Outrun because they're rendered in the same way. All the sprites in the game are calculated in 3D and converted backwards to 2D using a sprite scaling technique called superscalar technology. If I could use one word to describe the graphics, it would be this: basic. This isn't a bad thing, as there's really no reason to put huge amounts of detail into scenery models that are going to be whipping by you so fast you won't notice them. but I do question the lack of detail in the cars and the landscape art. Outrun had this because it was programmed for an arcade board with less than 4MB of memory, so they had to pare everything down to the basics. I feel a lot more detail could have been put into the graphics without ruining the aesthetic. And if there's one area that it improves upon, it's the music. The awesome soundtrack by F.O. Harkey is easily the best thing about this game. It treads that fine line where it sounds both old and contemporary at the same time. There are some real pulse-raising tracks, and when they line up with the racing action, it's so much fun. Too bad it just doesn't happen often, as the soundtrack suffers from a lack of tempo matching, often following up a really fast song with a much slower one. This means the game can often struggle to maintain a consistent tone throughout the races. The soundtrack is also one for the synthwave purists. If you aren't into synthwave, you will not like this. Thankfully, there is an option to add your own tracks to the playlist if you wish. In summary, while I recommend Slipstream to fans of racing games, I can't recommend it over any other titles. It's really only a game you should buy if you've bought or played most of the others. Unless you've got a very niche Outrun or Lotus Elise shaped hole in your heart, there are better racing games around that look and play better than this for around the same amount of money. You could pick up the greatest racer ever, Arthur Rally, right now for not much more, and it's superior in every way. Horizon Chase Turbo also does everything Slipstream does with better graphics and gameplay too. If you've played both of those, or if you really want to experience what early arcade racers were like with no add-ons and you can't be bothered with an emulator, then give this a shot.